to what might be colloquially known as the graveyard session of the Royal Economic Society, but we have some great speakers to liven the graveyard up, and none better than Philippe Aghion. This session is on growth. It's part of the special issue of the Economic Journal, and 3 speakers on growth. Philippe is going to speak first, and then myself and Ufuk. So, Philippe, over to you.
Yeah, but I'm looking for my presentation there. I don't see it. Where is it? Oh, God. I'm sorry. I feel... I'm sure you can do something else. My presentation was supposed to be there. Where is she, the person? We don't put the... God. I don't understand. The presentation should have been on. I have him on my stick. One second. I don't see where it is. One second.
No, it doesn't prove that it's freezing. You have your slide from a USB?
I've already loaded them up.
Okay, I have it now. Great. Okay, thanks. So this is joint work with Ufuk and with Angus Deaton and Alexandra Roulet. And it's about creative destruction and subjective well-being. And what we are interested in is to look at the general question, the broad question is, how does income or income growth affect well-being, happiness in a broad sense? And most of the papers in the literature, they would just look at relationship between the two, but not looking really at mechanisms. And what's interesting is to say, well, it depends what drives growth. You know, growth can be driven by factor accumulation. It can be driven by imitation or by innovation activities. And depending on the engine of growth, the answer to the question, is growth good or bad for happiness or for well-being, would be a different answer. So what's special about innovation-led growth is that you have creative destruction, is that the new replaces the old. So you have all the time creation and destruction of firms and creation and destruction of jobs. And you want to know, okay, you have the bad side and the good side. The bad side is that you destroy jobs. The good side is that you create new jobs and you create growth. And you want to ask at the end of the day, what is the overall effect on growth? So what I will do is briefly develop a model that will, try to disentangle these various effects that innovation-led growth can have on well-being and make predictions. And then I will very quickly move to the data. The data is cross-municipality data in the US to try and test the predictions of the model. Okay, that's what I'm doing here. So the basic idea is that when you have more turnover, more creative destruction, on the one hand, it translates into a higher probability of becoming unemployed if you're currently employed. That's bad for life satisfaction. Of course, the good side is that turnover also creates new jobs. That's good. And then you have an indirect effect, which is a growth effect, which is that, of course, more growth will mean that your income will grow over time, and that should be a good thing for life satisfaction. And it all revolves around these 3 effects, and to know when is one effect dominating the others, and that's what it's all about, okay? So, so the main prediction of the model is that the effect of turnover on well-being is unambiguously positive if you control for unemployment, but less so if you do not control for unemployment, since unemployment is the main source of, of the decrease in well-being if you have more turnover, okay? And that's the kind of main prediction that I will talk about. Okay, so let me just move into the model quickly and then move quickly to the slides. Maybe it might be nice if you tell me in 7 minutes, I would like to be essentially into the empirics, or 7-10 minutes at most, into the empirics, because we don't have much time, 7 minutes, maybe less. So the model is a Schumpeterian model of growth through creative destruction, so where you create growth, but on the other hand, new innovations destroy existing technology and put the current workers unemployed, and they are unemployed until they find a new job. So, so in fact, you see more formally, what you have, so I will show you just a few slides of modeling, but just a few, is that suppose that you have, like in my lecture yesterday, final output is produced with a continuum of intermediate inputs. That's the set of active sectors, the sectors that are active, because there are sectors which are inactive, okay? And now the J is the set of active sectors, which is a subset of the set 0, 1 of sectors. Each sector will employ one worker, okay? So what happens in this world is that you have a given sector, suddenly an innovation occurs, then the current worker will become unemployed, the new entrant will look for a new worker which is suited to the technology, and during the time between the previous worker was fired and the new worker is hired, the sector will become inactive and the worker will be unemployed, okay? So at any time, so that's what will happen. So I assume that every intermediate input is produced with labor, and this A, I used to call it Q in the lecture yesterday. This is the productivity of labor in producing intermediate input, and that, each time you have an innovation, you multiply this A by a factor lambda, and I assume that each sector employs one worker, okay? So, just bear with me, I was almost done with the model. When you have an innovation in a particular sector J, it will move the productivity of labor from A to lambda A, where lambda is greater than 1, and lambda is the size of innovation. The innovator is a new entrant, and so when entry occurs, as I said before, it will occur with a Poisson rate X, and X is the rate of turnover, and that's what will be the variable. I'll say a higher X, what does it do to well-being? That will be my exogenous variable. You could endogenize, of course, entry, saying entry depends on variance, which I won't do here. So at a certain rate, you have new entrants. When you have a new entrant, he comes in with a better technology, and he puts the worker on the current technology to unemployment. Then the sector becomes idle, becomes inactive until the new entrant finds a worker adapted to the technology, and then the sector becomes active again. So at any moment in time, the unemployment rate is 1 minus the set of active sectors, you see? The G is the number of sectors that are active. So the proxy for life satisfaction will be let U be the steady state unemployment rate. It's also the probability that an individual will be unemployed, okay? And 1 minus U is probability of being employed. So if you enter the economy and you don't know at first if you'll be unemployed or employed, your welfare is, your expected welfare is U times the value of being unemployed, plus 1 minus U, the value of being employed. These values, they satisfy Bellman equations, okay? So the annuity value of being currently employed minus the capital gain is that's the share of income you get if you're employed. And with Poisson probability X, you go from employment to unemployment. That's the Bellman equation for the value of being employed. Similarly, you have a Bellman equation for the value of being unemployed. The annuity value of being unemployed minus the capital gain of that value is the unemployment benefit that you get, or more or less the utility of being unemployed. You may like leisure, or it's you see, that's captured by the B. But with some probability, M over U, M is the matching rate, and of course, if you have U unemployed, the probability that any worker will find a new job is the matching rate divided by the number of unemployed. So that's the probability that any individual worker will find a job. And if you find a job, you move from being unemployed to being employed, and that's the Bellman equation. So you can solve for this. Suppose that M of U and V is U alpha V1 minus alpha, like in the search literature. Suppose that it's Cobb-Douglas in U and V. V is the vacancies. U is the unemployment rate, okay? V is the amount. Each time you have a sector, a new entrant enters the sector, you create a vacancy. You see what I mean? And V is the amount of vacancy. So we end up, at the end, you can simplify, you can solve for all this, and you get a very nice expression for the welfare. You see the welfare depends on the, can be written like this, where B is beta pi minus B. B is the unemployment benefit. And you can see that you have a first effect, a higher turnover rate will give you a higher X, it will give you a higher G. And you see that G on its own, a higher G, increases the value, the welfare. That's what I call the capitalization effect. Higher turnover increases the growth rate, and therefore you discount the future income stream at a lower rate, R minus G, and therefore it increases your welfare, okay? Everything else equal. But on the other hand, you have the displacement effect. It is for given growth rate, a higher X will in fact reduce life satisfaction, because it's true you create future job, but you eliminate current job, and one dominates the other overall. For given rate G, it's bad here to have more turnover, you see? So you have the opposite effects of turnover on well-being, okay? But you can see also that here is here it's the job creation, and that's the job destruction. Here it dominates. It's not the case where you have exogenous job destruction on top. So now another thing, and then I'm done with the model, is that you can re-express the welfares like this. And you can, and U is the equilibrium unemployment rate, which is X over 1 plus X, you can solve. But what's interesting is that for given unemployment rate, you see that the effect of turnover on well-being is unambiguously positive. So the only reason why turnover might be bad for welfare is because it raises the probability that you'll be unemployed, okay? So for given unemployment rate, the effect of turnover is unambiguously positive. And at the end, you get these predictions, and I'm done with the model part. Prediction 1, a higher turnover rate, a higher X, increases well-being unambiguously when you control for unemployment, less so if you don't control for unemployment. Prediction 2, a higher turnover rate increases well-being more. The more turnover is associated with growth-enhancing activity. For example, the bigger the size of innovation, the bigger the lambda, and the more a higher X translates into a higher G. 3, a higher turnover rate increases well-being more, where unemployment benefits are more generous. Unemployment benefits more generous means that you have a smaller capital B. You see, remember capital B? When you have more generous unemployment benefits, you reduce this term, so you enhance the positive effect of turnover on well-being, which is not surprising. And finally, more forward-looking individual typically will see the positive side, because they will factor in the G part more. The more forward-looking you are, the more you take into account the growth part of it, you see, versus the current plus of being unemployed. That's what I will test over the data, okay? How long do I have left? 10 minutes, okay. Oh. So the data very quickly. The data, so I want to regress well-being on turnover. How do I measure the right-hand side variable, which is turnover? In fact, we use Davis-Alty-Wanger type of data on job creation, job destruction. And so that data comes from the business dynamic statistics, which provide at municipal level in the US information on job creation, job destruction, and entry and exit of establishment. Then, if I want to look at the happiness part, there is something called the country ladder. So there is a data set called Gallup that Deaton and co-authors have used. And they ask questions. Every year they sample a certain number of individuals randomly, but they don't sample the same individuals a year, day by day. And they ask them, imagine a ladder between 0 and 10. How do you evaluate your life between 0 and 10? And they ask also the question, try to picture yourself in 5 years. How do you think you will evaluate your life 5 years down the road, okay? Which is more forward-looking. That I call the anticipated ladder. The other first one I call the ladder, okay, the country ladder. And there is another data set, which is the BRFSS, and we use the life satisfaction question. In general, how satisfied you are with your life. And it goes from very satisfied to very dissatisfied. And we recode so that number 4 will be for the most satisfied and number 1 for the least satisfied. But what's very interesting is that the two data sets are very different and the questions are not asked exactly the same way. And we will see the qualitative results are identical. So we have two different data sets, two different surveys with questions asked differently. And we will get similar results. Okay? So now let me show you, I will show essentially municipal level regressions. There we also do individual regression, and then I will look at heterogeneity, see how the effects vary with sectoral composition in the municipality or with unemployment benefit and with age. So let me show the main table. That's the first thing. You see here, I use the Gallup data, and I look at the ladder, how you evaluate your life between 0 and 10 as a function of turnover. And you see that you have a slightly positive effect of turnover. The overall effect here is slightly positive. But once you control for unemployment, the effect becomes much more positive. You see that? Which is exactly what the prediction would tell you. And now what's amazing is that you now go to the BRFSS data, different survey, different, and you ask the same question. And the effect of turnover overall is not significant. But once you control for unemployment, it becomes positive, very significant. You see, very similar result. And then you can ask the anticipated ladder. I don't know, where do I go? Oh, yeah, okay. So now it's the anticipated ladder, and there you see that the effect is positive even when I don't control for unemployment. It becomes a bit more positive when I control for unemployment. But already, even without controlling for unemployment, when I try to say how you feel you will be in 5 years, you tend to discount the unemployment cost. It's like if you were, I appeal to a more forward-looking part of yourself, you see, a more patient part, and you put more positive weight. That's very interesting. And then you can look at worry. You see how much you worry. And you see, of course, when you have more turnover, you worry more. But when you control for unemployment, the worry is a bit less, you see. The worry goes down. It doesn't go down to 0. Because even if people don't go through unemployment, they don't, some people worry when they have to change job from job to job. But still, controlling for unemployment reduces a bit the worry. Okay? So now you can look at individual data instead of municipal level. And individual data allow you to control for gender, ethnicity, education, status, age, etc. And for year and month fixed effect. And you get very similar results. That's the BRFSS. If you don't control for unemployment, you have a positive effect, but more positive when you control for unemployment as before. But now you control for year and month fixed effect, which we didn't before. And we have the Gallup. See, the Gallup, you see that your turnover, you don't see a positive effect, but more becomes positive significant when you control for unemployment rate. That's the individual data, okay? Now, I want to worry, and it's the same, and anticipated ladder is the same. You see, the anticipated ladder is already positive. Even if you don't control for unemployment, becomes a bit more positive when you do. And worry is positive, the effect, of course, but when you control for unemployment, the worry goes down. So exactly like in the MSA level regressions. So now I want to just look at restriction. First, you restrict to period pre-crisis, because I look at the period 2005, 2011. Some years were crisis years and non-crisis years. You can decompose, and you can see that the effect is there, whether you restrict attention to non-crisis years or to crisis years, you see. But the main thing we do is to say, well, you might be worried that creative destruction is endogenous. So, and that there are various things happening, you know, in the state or the municipal level that are, you know, spurious correlations between well-being and creative destruction locally. So what we do is that we almost do like an instrumentation, but it's a reduced form regression. We construct a predicted measure of creative destruction. And how do we construct it? In any municipality, you have a composition, a sectoral composition. We do Bartik. We have a sectoral composition of the municipality in terms of various sectors. We know how nationally creative destruction varies there. And we just weigh the creative destruction of the various sectors nationally by the weight that these sectors have before the period starts. And that's the predicted measure. And if we use this predicted measure instead of the previous measure, we find exactly the same qualitative result. You see, predicted turnover has a positive effect, so a slightly positive effect on well-being, but when you control for unemployment, the effect goes up by much, you see. So you get the same qualitative results. Although a bit more positive on the predicted than on the actual, which may seem that some of the stuff that goes on at MSA level might act negatively on the well-being. Let me know if I have not much time. I just want to talk about 3 interaction terms, 3 minutes. So to finish up, let me talk you. What I will do now is to interact. I will regress well-being on creative destruction interacted with some characteristics. The first characteristic is whether the sectoral composition of the municipality, whether sectors are growing or outsourcing. And so let me show you directly the table. Let me show you the table. So that table, oh God, that table tells you above median means that you are in a municipality where sectors grow faster than the median. So if you are in a region, in a municipality dominated by fast-growing sector, you can see that the effect of turnover interacted with above median is positive. That means when people lose their job in a place where you have high growth of sectors, they don't worry too much. They are not so, because they know that new jobs will be created fast. You see? And you find that here. It's like saying that the growth part plays more there, you see? You remember there is the growth versus the losing job. The growing part, the growth part plays more there. Now, if you look, you can do the same, looking at sectors that outsource more. If you are in municipalities dominated by sectors that delocalize their production to China more than the median, is exactly the opposite effect. You see the negative interaction. If you are in a municipality dominated by sectors that whenever they destroy a job, they create it in China and not here, you will tend to have a less positive effect of turnover on well-being. And finally, the unemployment benefit. When you are in a region, so that's the next table. When you are in a region where you have in states where more above median your unemployment benefit generosity, you will see that in fact the effect of turnover is more positive, whereas it's not positive if you are in a municipality located in a state which doesn't have generous unemployment benefit, which means more generally that labor market policy like benefit will affect, of course, the extent to which turnover is perceived positively or negatively by people. If people are in a state where you have a good safety net whenever you become unemployed, it's a nicer ride for them, the creative destruction. If they are in a state where non-generous unemployment benefits, it will be a tougher ride for them. And of course, they will value less positively turnover. And now I'm done. Conclusion. We have analyzed the relationship between turnover-driven growth and subjective well-being using municipal MSA level turnover data and subjective well-being data from Gallup and from BRFSS. The overall effect of turnover is positive and ambiguously when you control for unemployment, less so if you do not. Creative destruction has a more positive effect on anticipated life satisfaction than on current life satisfaction. You are more forward-looking when you are asked the anticipated question. Creative destruction increases worry, but less so if you control for unemployment. And finally, it has a more positive effect on subjective well-being in areas dominated by faster-growing sectors or that outsource less, or in municipalities in states that have more generous unemployment benefits. And I will stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Philippe. 54 slides in 25 minutes is so we have about 4 minutes for questions. So if people have questions, I'd like to ask Philippe.
We'll be oh no, we should move on. I think we don't have time.
Rachel.
Yes, Rachel.
So Philippe, I think you said that when you have unemployment benefits, you became less unhappy. That compensated you to some extent. But wouldn't you worry that that may then have an effect on the propensity to innovate, because people would affect the incentives to innovate?
Alors that we take here as given, and you could of course try to endogenize innovation. That might make people see the downside. And, but although here we look at state level and the rest is at MSA level, so we might disentangle different propensities across MSAs, but you could say a certain policy could affect the innovation rate itself and look into that. Alors in the paper, we endogenize the entry, you know, the turnover, and they make it depend on various things, but we don't explore that in the empirical analysis. Yeah, I think we should probably, John, you should move on.
Questions? Okay.
John, take this.
I think I'm okay, actually.
Okay.
I could probably do it from the mic. Okay, great. So, really pleased to be able to have the chance to talk about some new work, relatively preliminary work, which is on the life cycle of inventors. It's joint work with Vaz Chetty at Harvard, two students, Alex and Xavier, and Neviana from the Office of Tax Analysis. So this is, I mean, it very much leads off inspirationally from Philippe's talk and his talk yesterday. So, you know, innovation really, we think, is at the center of modern theories of growth. And, you know, building on Philippe's seminal work with Peter Howitt, we want to think about how we get growth through innovation. And despite that, despite a lot of the work which many other people have done on looking at firms, there's a lot less known about the individual characteristics of inventors. And ultimately, it's people who do inventions and come up with new ideas. And we don't really have fantastic data on knowing, basic things about many inventors. So information on the background of the parents of inventors, information on their income before and after they've innovated, their age profile, their gender. It's relatively scarce and typically in kind of smaller data sets. So there is an emerging literature of which this paper is part of, which is trying to build up closer to population level databases, matching information on inventors with information on their backgrounds and their life trajectory. So, I mean, there's another paper Philippe mentioned in his talk yesterday with Ufuk and Otto Toivainen looking at Finnish inventors. This paper is going to be focusing on a slightly larger sample looking at US inventors. So this is one paper in a kind of broader project. In this paper, we have a specific goal, which is to give a kind of descriptive portrait of the life cycle of US inventors compared to non-inventors, using what you might think of as administrative big data. So we're going to be working with kind of a population of people in the United States who file taxes, and the population of inventors is something like 3 billion observations over a 16-year period. So it's a kind of large data set. And we want to have a kind of, we have a descriptive purpose for this, but it's part of a kind of broader goal that we have, which is for trying to understand what types of policies are most likely to spark innovation. And you can think of these policies of two types. So one type is kind of conventional, more demand side of policies which are like R&D tax subsidies that Rachel and I have studied and other people have studied, tax rates on high marginal tax rates on individuals, which is a very relevant topic. I was here this morning talking about that. But the other types of policies you could think of sparking innovation are supply side policies to draw more people into the innovation sector. And these are a lot less well studied. And I'm going to argue that if we think about types of policies to kind of help create the kind of human capital required to be an innovator, these actually may be much more effective. So if you think about one of the criticisms of a demand-side policy, you subsidize R&D activity by firms, a lot of the benefit of that might just, the instance of that might just be higher wages for people like us, for researchers, which is great for us, but not what we want to incentivize as a society if we want to get more volume of research and innovation happening. Whereas a supply-side policy, which creates more people going into innovation, will both increase the volume of innovation and won't necessarily, won't have will, if anything, have a reduction in the price of R&D or innovation. So they may be much more effective in the long run. So I'm going to use patents as a measure of innovation with all their problems. I'll be using some site-weighted patents. There are a lot of studies which have linked patent data to firms. Bronwyn Hall's work, Ufuk's work in the US to study company innovation. What we're going to be doing is we're going to take US patent data and matching that to individual inventors through the tax records of all inventors. So that's going to give us data on the birth and family background of inventors, their childhood, their education, and the labour market careers. In particular, we're looking at the returns that they get from the wages and income they get for after they've innovated. So we have no great, clever instrument here looking at the causal determinants of innovation, but I'm going to argue our results do point to two general lessons for policy. First of all, there may be substantial losses from the misallocation of talent. And by that I mean, sometimes we call this the lost Einstein effect. That there could be very talented kids out there who are born into low-income families who don't actually get a chance to grow up to be an innovator like Einstein because of the restrictions they have in their family, the income their families have, the schools they go to, the neighborhoods they grow up in. And this potentially can have very large negative effects on welfare. So actually one of Ufuk's students, Philippe, has a nice theoretical model built around this. But it's a very kind of intuitive type of idea that kids who might be very able and may have grown up to be innovators don't have that opportunity because of the resources that they lack. And we're actually going to find when we try and decompose the effects of why your background may inhibit your ability to be an innovator, schooling and human capital acquisition accounts a lot of this. So it's not so much your initial ability, but it's how human capital gets accumulated through your childhood and which college you go to. Another bit of evidence on the importance of environment is that we're going to be exploiting some place effects, so looking at people who grow up in different places and who move across different places, and argue again the place that you grow up in seems to also have an effect on your probability to become an inventor. By contrast, the demand-side policies, which I have kind of focused on in some of our other work, the effects may be much more modest. So if we think about tax incentives through reducing top tax rates, as we were talking about this morning, they may actually be much less important. We're going to, for example, we're going to have a little model. We have a little model in the paper where we characterize the incentives to innovate. It turns out if you look at if you have a higher top tax rate, that reduces your incentive to come up with a new invention. However, the magnitude of that effect is actually pretty low. And the reason, the intuition for that is because the returns to invention and patenting are extremely skewed. It's a big lottery. The marginal utility reduction of a tax rate on my incentive to innovate is pretty small. So with a concave utility function, if I have a 50% or a 60% tax rate over a prize of $100 million, it's not going to really matter much because it's really the big prize which matters so much. So when you have very skewed returns, it turns out the top taxes actually are not so important to disincentivize innovation. So I don't have too much time to talk about that, but that's the other part of the paper, the demand side. Okay, huge literature. Many people in the audience have contributed to this, haven't got time to talk about it, but it obviously relates to lots of issues of intergenerational equality, education and growth, individual inventors, this emerging literature that I mentioned. Okay, so let's get on to the data. So what is the data that we use? So we get classical data on patents granted between 1996 and 2012 from the US Patent Office. We actually now have data up to 2014. The current data I'm going to show you is just till 2012. There's about 1.5 million patents in this database, about 100 to 200,000 patents per year. And from this we get some key bits of information: the inventor's name, the application date, the sector they're in, and subsequent citations. So this is a kind of typical patent. You can see on the patent the kind of applicant, but you can also see who the inventors are. So this is going to be the kind of information that we use to match into the kind of tax records alongside the address and the date of the guys. So we link this by inventor name, city and state at the time of patent application. From the tax data we have income. We have all types of income. We have the wage income, so some of your return might come from the wage you get on your job. We have the self-employment income. We have the royalties from the patent, the capital income, and so on. And we managed to match about 90% of the individual inventors in the raw patent file. And if you compare the matched and unmatched data, it looks balanced on all the observables like location, citation, technology, class. So on the inventors, we have about 786,000 inventors. matched into about 2.5 million income observations, as well as the other billions of observations, who are the non-inventors. As usual, the data is extremely skewed. So the median individual who patents has 2 patents, has 6 citations, but that has a very, very skewed distribution. So you can see if you look at the kind of standard deviations of patents and inventors, highly skewed. The average age is about 46. They are high-income people, so the average wage income is about $140,000 a year, and is dominated by men. Only about 11% of inventors are female. I'm going to come back to that in some of the work I'm going to show you. Okay, so how do we organize this kind of data set to start describing inventors? So the way we're organizing this, and the model we build, has a very simple structure. So we have aspects of an inventor's life around the birth, who their parents are, what their gender is, what their early ability is as measured by some test score data. We have information as they grow up, what neighborhood they lived in, what college they went to, and finally we have the information over what career they chose and what earnings they have. So I'm going to structure the talk around these different stages of the life cycle. So to link the data to the parents, we're going to leverage off some other work that Raj has done based on the dependent who's claiming the children for the tax records. For that reason, we can only reliably identify parents for children born after 1980. So we're going to focus on young inventors who patented before the age of 32, or in the more recent data, 34. Which is still a big sample. So in this part of the paper, we have about 20,000 inventors born after 1980. We measure income as the mean household income between 1996 and 2000. And then what we do is we calculate the fraction of children in that birth cohort who grow up to be inventors, who are granted patents before the age of 23 in each percentile bin. So here's the kind of first bit of new information. So what do we do here? So along the y-axis, we put each of the parents into a percentile. So this is the kind of top 1%. This is the bottom 1% in terms of your parents' income. And along the y-axis, we have the inventor rate. So whether the proportion per 10,000 of those kids who grew up to be inventors. So you can see this, sharp upward sloping pattern. If you're born rich, you're much more likely to grow up to be an inventor than if you were born poor. So for example, the patent rate for those who are below median parents' income is something like 2.2 per 10,000, whereas the patent rate for people in the top 10% is an order of magnitude higher than that, 22.5. So it makes a mass. Choose your parents wisely, as Voltaire said, if you want to be an inventor. So why is there this strong correlation between the wealth of your parents and whether you become an inventor or not? Well, one story is that this could just be almost like a genetic reason for this. So if children from high-income families have high ability, because their parents are smart and they're rich because they're smart, therefore it's not surprising that you see this relationship because the kids who are born smart grow up to be inventors. So that's one story why you might see this. The second story is the one that I hinted at in the beginning, is that it may reflect a misallocation of talent. In other words, there may be low-income children who face other barriers despite having comparable talent to their richer counterparts. And thirdly, there may be some kind of preference aspect. So maybe lower-income children prefer other occupations, so for example, because of risk aversion or kind of other factors. So we're going to partially distinguish between some of these explanations by using measures of ability in human capital acquisition. So we're going to start by using data on test scores. We're going to use New York City public schools. That's the biggest school district in the US. So for the kids who are in New York City public schools, we can match this data to them. And then from that, we have test score data from grade 3 through to grade 8. In fact, we're also going to use information about where everybody went to college as well. So that gives you kind of information for kids around about 8 up to kind of 14 years of age. So if you take that data, let's take the 3rd grade maths test scores. This is standardized, so we just look in kind of vintiles here. And then we look at the probability, depending on your test score when you were a kid, whether you grew up to be an inventor. You can see that, kind of as you might think, the smart kids who get very high scores on their maths are much more likely to grow up to be inventors than the other kids. In fact, it's very much the top 15% of the distribution who are much more likely to be inventors than anybody in the bottom 85, the other 85% of the population. So, smart kids, or at least who come with ability at the early age, are much more likely to be inventors. So then if we then look at the distribution of test scores across parents with different income, you can also see there may be something in that first argument, because this blue line is the kind of distribution, the kernel distribution of kids from low-income parents. The red line is the distribution of kids from high-income parents. And you can see that the whole distribution shifted to the right. In other words, the kids from high-income parents have higher test scores at early ages than the kids from low-income parents. So that's kind of consistent with what we might think. But then the question is, well, how much of the innovation gap does this explain? Does this explain all of the difference that we observe, or is it only partially the difference? So the way we approach this is we do a kind of decomposition where we say, okay, well, let's give the low-income kids the test score distribution of the high-income kids. So we do a Donato-Fortran-Lemieux type of decomposition, which kind of generalizes in a Hacker-Blinder thing. So we don't want to just give them the mean as you would in a kind of a Hacker-Blinder decomposition, because a lot of the action's going on in the right tail. So doing the full distribution accounting is important. So let's do that and see what happens. So you can do this with different quantiles, but here's kind of one example. We say, okay, let's look at all the kids from families above median income versus all the kids from families below median income. And there's the different patent rates that I kind of showed you in the earlier chart. So the kids the rich kids are more likely to be inventors than poor kids. So the difference in the kind of income innovation gap is something like 3.67. So then we say, okay, well, let's now do the Donato et al. Approach, and let's give the poor kids the test scores of the rich kids. So this boosts up the innovation rate of the poor kids. But how much does it actually explain? Well, it would boost up it would reduce the gap to some degree, to 3, but it only accounts for a relatively small proportion. So only 16% of that gap between invention and income can be accounted for by these early test scores. So it matters, but it's by far from the whole story. So that's for third grade. Now what we can do is we can keep on looking at the kids as they go through school. So if you do that, before I do that, let me just show you why it's not the whole story. So if you look at this is the kind of test scores that I showed you, this is the invention rate. So you can see again, the smart kids are more likely to be inventors, but the kids from low-income parents, even if they're in the kind of top decile of the test score distribution, are much less likely to be inventors than the kids from rich families. And then we can do that as they go through school. So this is the 16% that I showed you. And then as the kids go through school, the test scores that they get account for more and more of the differences of the innovation rates. So it's about 5% per grade. So what's happening is that the gap between educational attainments of rich and poor kids gets wider and wider as you go through during time. In fact, as I'll show you, that if you know whether a child went to MIT or Harvard or Manchester, by that point, when they come out of the labour market, the parents' income doesn't count for anything. So the income of the parents only is mediated through the human capital acquisition, which is quite, so if you thought the story was, well, even if 2 engineers came out of MIT, if one was from a rich family, their fathers or their mothers could help them out if they tried to innovate and took a risk. That doesn't seem to be the story. The way that wealth seems to be operating is through the acquisition of human capital throughout the lifetime. Contrast that with the male-female gap. So this is the difference between men and women. So this is the proportion of women who are inventors in 1940 going up to the proportion in 1980. So you can see that women are catching up with men in terms of the proportion of inventors, but it's very slow. So if you extrapolated this line, it would take about 140 years before we had equality in invention. And you might say, well, is that something to do with test scores or something to do with human capital? And the answer is no. So this is the grade 5 math scores of men versus women. Basically looks as, apart from a very small amount of the tail, it almost makes no difference. So there's no Larry Summers effect here of greater dispersion of men than women, at least from the New York City kids at grade 8. So, basically, if you do the same thing, you can't explain any of the 3% of the male-female gap because of test scores, and it's basically not there. So, if you want to explain differences between men and women, you've got to look somewhere else than human capital. This is another stunning fact from the data. So, this is if you look at the number of citations, this is kind of site-weighted patents. 10 universities in the United States account for about a quarter of all citations. That's people who've been to those 10 universities in the US, and you can probably guess who they are, account for a quarter of all the citations to all patents in the United States. And the top 20 universities account for about a third. So the top 10 count for about 2.7% of college enrollment. So that's an incredible concentration of innovation activity amongst the, you can imagine the kind of top schools like MIT in the US. And as I said, basically, once you know which kind of college someone went to, your parents' income ceases, is no longer correlated with whether you're not an inventor or not. Okay, so there's a lot of issues around this. I haven't really got time to go into them. I mean, there's an issue about, in behavioral genetics, whether or not your genes affect your level or can affect your change. We're doing some work on, we can distinguish the biological parents from the actual parents through the birth certificate data which we matched in. It turns out that these income effects are somewhat attenuated by that, but still more than at least half of this appears to be initial income. However, there's lots of other things. This is there's no perfect natural experiment we have here. So we also look at another design to see whether the environment matters, whether or not you become an inventor. And to do that, we look at rates of innovation in the areas where kids grew up. So the first thing we do is we look at where children were when they grew up, depending on which states they were in and which commuting zones they were in. And then we look at whether or not, we look at the innovation rates of those states that they were in or commuting zones that they were in when they grew up. So this is a kind of innovation map of the United States. So the dark areas are the very non-innovative places. The light areas are the more innovative places. So, the northeast around Massachusetts, the, northwest parts around the Great Lakes are highly innovative. The deep south is extremely uninnovative. And if you then correlate that with the probability of kids who grew up in those places, whether they became an inventor or not, you see there's a pretty good correlation. So if you were growing up in a state like Massachusetts, you're much more likely to end up being an inventor. Now, of course, there's lots of other things which are happening in those states which we can't control for. So we do two things to look at that. One is we look at movers, which helps deal with some of the endogeneity problem, look at exposure time to these. The other thing that we do is we look at the relative amount of innovation in different technology classes. So the idea is if you were someone who's growing up in the Bay Area around Silicon Valley, which does a lot of computer innovations, but not so many medical device innovations, are you more likely not just to grow up to be an inventor, but more likely to be an inventor who specializes in computers rather than medical devices? And the opposite might be true in Minnesota, and the Mayo Clinic means you have a lot of medical device innovations relative to computer inventions. And it turns out that's a pretty tough test, but that kind of turns out to work quite well. So if you look along the x-axis is the kind of relative technology innovation rate across technology classes in the place, and on the y-axis is the relative probability of growing up to be an inventor in different technology classes, and it turns out that actually works quite well. So you're much more likely not just to be an inventor if you grow up in the Bay Area, but to be an inventor who specializes in kind of computer type of technologies. Okay, so then to finish up, let's look briefly at the kind of career of the inventors, and I'll just show you, I think, one graph here, which is, so because we know the income before and after, we can do kind of event studies. So we can say, okay, let's look at the income of an inventor before you took out your patent application compared to after you took out your patent application. And that controls for lots of the other observables you might worry about. So here is the income. So you can see the income is relatively high. Here's the time of the patent event. So you can see it looks like there's no return to these inventions, but note, these are inventions which received 0 citations. If you look at patents which received a lot of citations, and it's kind of top 1%, you can see that there is, looks like a twist in the rate distribution exactly around the time when the patent was applied for. And if you look at the very highly cited patents and the kind of over 50 citations, you see a kind of even higher twist. So unsurprisingly, this is the kind of selection effect. The guys who are doing the highly cited patterns are already earning higher wages before they patent it. But you see this kind of twist, the event study twist, which suggests significant returns to these inventions. Now, interestingly, you know, these returns are extremely skewed. So if you dig into this and look at the kind of quantile regressions, a lot of the returns are coming from the guys right out in the tails of the distribution. And this goes, and you know, you can use this kind of distribution of returns to be like a kind of capital asset pricing type of exercise. The asset is the intellectual property, and we're pricing this out by looking at the return that you get in terms of wages and income. It turns out that, you know, this gives you incentives to innovate, but, you know, because of the fact that when you think about the marginal effects of taxation on the incentives to innovate, because it's so skewed, taxation has a relatively small effect on the incentive to innovate, certainly much smaller than the kind of supply side type of policies which I kind of focused on. Okay, so I think I'm more or less out of time. Just to say, you know, in conclusion, you know, what we're trying to do in this paper is to profile large-scale inventors, looking at their life cycles using administrative data. We find that parental income really matters for inventor status. So rich kids are much more likely to be inventors than poor kids. And this seems to be mediated mainly through human capital acquisition, so mainly through the kind of test scores that they get as they move through their life and their subsequent education. So, you know, in addition to that, neighborhoods and place seem to matter. It doesn't look like it's kind of all in the genes. So it does suggest this idea of misallocation of talent might be important. And from a policy point of view, one way we could boost innovation might be getting more high ability but low income kids to be inventors, a kind of unconventional supply side policy. It brings together the educational policies, which have mainly been seen in an equity point of view, into a kind of growth policy, which is a way of getting more invention. And there's lots of very good studies on randomized control trials looking at different educational inventions, like for instance, David Card has this paper on gifted and talented programs in low-income schools, which seem to be very effective. Roland Fryer has examples in charter schools of injecting kind of charter school principles into public schools. Raj has lots of work on how you can improve neighborhoods. So the flavor of this is that, you know, the supply side policies actually might be much more important in the very long run in terms of growth than the more conventional innovation policies that I and many other people have tended to focus on. Okay, that's it.
Questions for John?
So I guess this is maybe a naive question, but I'm trying to see how this sort of competitive life cycle fits into the more international context, where events are presumably very global. They move around. I suspect quite a lot of US patentees weren't educated in the US. So, do you know quantitatively how much of an effect that might have?
Well, the expert on this is sitting over here, who has a new paper, another new paper, looking at the
you can't link up those guys, right?
Well, okay, so for the returns we do. So, for example, when we look at the returns, the wage returns we have, as long as you file this, if you have and I have a tax return in the US, then you'll be in here regardless of where you were born. So for everybody who files a tax return, we have them in, so we can look at the returns. Now, what we can't do so well is look at the parents and the test scores and the kids. So that bit is very much a US domestic type of analysis. But for some other parts, we can look at returns. I mean, Ufuk's paper is very nice because it looks at taxes, like the kind of football movers, and he does find evidence that taxes have effects on mobility of inventors. But although they're significant, the magnitude of those, my interpretation, is not enormous. The kind of the magnitude is relatively small. It's kind of consistent with the kind of model that I was suggesting that tax matters, but in terms of the magnitude.
So, great, I love it. Well, I had a question about you didn't talk a lot about the distinction between inventors who invent, entrepreneurs who invent on their own and become, start a company and so, versus people that invent within firms.
Yes.
So I think one that could help you get to some of the issues. So is it about parental help with credit constraints? So we might expect that more on the entrepreneurial side, less on the firm side. But also thinking about what the mediation of human capital is doing is that actually getting people into that social network, where they get into a good firm, into a place where they have good resources. It seems like you could exploit it, like it's more. You could use that more.
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the just in terms of what we find. So if you look at the return, you do see a lot of the return coming from wages. So even guys in the same job, in the same firm, do get this.
So does that include self-employed people then that are innovative, that are entrepreneurs?
So we have everybody,
Okay.
and so it's certainly a big part of the effect. Most people are wage earners, so a big part of the effect comes from just wages. Some of it comes from moving across firms, but most of it actually is within firms. But there's also, just as you're saying, there's also a kind of income effect, which comes from some people who are starting up new firms, getting royalties on their inventions and so on. So there is some evidence that some of the returns, and especially some of the really big bonanza returns, are coming from the people who are becoming self-employed. So it turns out defining what an entrepreneur is not a trivial task. So we're investing in actually coming up with this data, new ways of defining entrepreneurship. And I think at some level you could run the entire analysis through just with entrepreneurship as a dependent variable. But we could also link it with these guys as well.
Business management that have shown entrepreneurship within the firms, and that some of the most entrepreneurial people are who are creative destruction within a firm, that you can really change the direction of the firm.
Entrepreneurs, they call it.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, that may be where it was very interesting to use this data to understand where that kind of innovation is coming from. We don't usually get to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thinking about the kind of public policy implications, I wanted to broaden the discussion exactly to entrepreneurship. And yes, education matters in that sense, but so does ambition. And the UK does particularly badly on kind of any international comparisons of, how ambitious people coming out of school are in terms of their initiative, entrepreneurship, and so on. So I'm just wondering if, elsewhere, you look at that role of ambition, obviously.
Yeah.
Whether it is something that public policy could in any way influence.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think doing the thing for entrepreneurship would be an interesting. We may get different, the same, very different results, of course. And as Rachel suggested, maybe family background still matters over and above human capital for those. It's very hard to get out. So test scores, you can get something of. I guess if you could somehow bring in non-cognitive type of information. So Yona Rubinstein and Russ Levine have this nice paper where they actually, I guess US rather than UK data, but they have the kind of IQs of people, but they also have the non-cognitive skills. It turns out the people who become entrepreneurs, they call it smart but illicit. So they tend to be smart, but they also tend to have done lots of things, we score them low on of, taking drugs at school, doing risky behaviour, all that. But the entrepreneurs actually have a combination of both. So, it's the same as true in the UK. It's not totally obvious what the policy implication is. You certainly wouldn't want to be, well, maybe you would, encouraging very risky behaviour to do that. But you might want to think about conditional on whatever characteristics people have. What are the type of barriers there might be to enable them to go on and be entrepreneurs, which could be income-based or it could be other stuff. Am I out of time? You're the boss.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. All right. So thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and also sharing the stage with such distinguished speakers. So today I will talk about growth through heterogeneous innovations, and this is a joint work with my long-term co-author Bill Kerr from Harvard University. So it's a great session with very coherent papers, and Philippe and John already set the stage. So we know in the data that the innovations come in different shapes and sizes. And there are internal innovations, there are external innovations, there are product innovations, there are process innovations, or radical versus incremental innovations. And likewise, small and large firms have different incentives to do innovation because of their market power or because of their position in the economy, maybe because of the bureaucracy that's going on within the firm. They have different incentives to do different types of innovations. So we know that not all the innovations are generating the same type of spillovers. Likewise, not all the firms are generating the same type of spillovers. Then the big question here is that how does firm size relate to innovation size, and which type of firms are generating bigger spillovers? So this is a million-dollar question because of the policy implications. Of course, you know, there's a big amount of resources that are devoted for industrial policy, but clearly it doesn't make sense to subsidize everybody the same way, because ideally we want to understand who are the key players in the economy that are generating the main spillovers, and ideally we want to go and support those guys' research. But that's a challenging task, and we want to take a step in that direction. So to answer this question, to get really at the bottom of this thing, we need to go from micro to macro. In the end, we are after macro policies, but in order to really make credible statements at the macro level, we should start from the micro level and discipline our analysis with the micro data such that we can mimic the behavior of the individuals or of the firms such that we can study the implications of the policy. So therefore, in this paper, what we do is that we build a general equilibrium model with new firm dynamics and innovation heterogeneity, and then we also utilize a large set of micro data. In particular, we use the census of firms. We use, of course, the best innovation data, which is the patent data, and particularly we are going to rely on citation information. Citation is particularly important because we know that citations, patent citations, are a great proxy for innovation quality and heterogeneity, and therefore we are going to push the theory as well, and we are going to incorporate a theory of citations into this growth model such that we can map the theory much closer to the microdata. So to achieve this, we are going to proceed in 3 steps. Part 1, developing a theory. In this theory, firms will come in different sizes. They are going to compete in the market, of course, just like in reality. Firms produce different type of innovations, and they will come in different sizes, as I said, and they are going to generate different spillovers, and we are going to allow for explicit citations. When we are building the model, we are not going to take any stand whether small firms or large firms are generating bigger spillovers. We are going to let the data speak. So therefore, the second part is using this microdata and just running some reduced form regressions in order to see at the basic level what's the link between firm size and various firm moments that we care about. In particular, what's the link between firm size and firm growth? Second, what's the link between firm size and innovation intensity, meaning that relative to their size, how much innovation are they producing? And at the third step, we are going to distinguish between quantity and quality, and we are going to ask, if we look at the major innovations that they are producing, are these major innovations relative to their size coming from small firms or large firms? In part 3, we are going to take this model and map it to the microdata, and we are going to do some structural estimation using indirect inference. And let me give you the spoiler already, because I might run out of time. So first, we are going to distinguish between 2 types of innovations, external versus internal, and the larger spillovers will mainly come from external innovations. And external innovation will not scale with firm size, meaning that relative to their size, since radical innovations will be coming mainly from small firms, and we are going to find that small firms on average generate larger spillovers. So without any further ado, let me dive into the model. Again, due to time constraints, I'm going to save you a lot of equations, and I will just give you the intuition of the model. So how do we think about this aggregate economy? First, for instance, we think of the US economy as a collection of industries or product lines or consumer needs. We don't need to necessarily take any stand on this. So we are going to index these industries between 0 and 1. Each of those dots here along this 0-1 interval will correspond to a product line or a finely defined industry. On the y-axis, we are going to have the quality levels or the current productivity level of that particular sector. And here, just to give you an example, for instance, here I plot 8 industries, and these are the existing productivities. And through new innovations, these productivities will go up, and this is going to be the source of both firm-level growth and also the economy-wide aggregate growth. Now, what is the definition of a firm in this model? The definition of a firm is simply a collection of production units, and in this particular example, for instance, Microsoft is operating in 5 different categories, okay? And of course, there are competitors in the market, and in particular, you know, Apple is competing with Microsoft, and currently Apple is leading the market in 3 different sectors, for instance. Now, these firms, in order to grow, will invest in R&D to improve their productivities, and they can do 2 types of innovations. Since Apple is already producing iPad, so one thing that Apple can do is improve its existing product in order to increase the profit margin. So as a result, it can do internal R&D, meaning that within the firm, it can try to improve the quality of the existing product, and through successful R&D, it will improve the quality, as you can see, and it's going to contribute to firm growth and also firm profit. Alternatively, Apple can try to challenge Microsoft in some of the sectors where Microsoft is leading, and that's what we are going to call the external R&D. Through external R&D, Apple can expand from 3 product lines to 4, 5, 6, etc., and this is going to be the competition in the market. And if they are successful, for instance, in this sector where Microsoft used to be the dominant firm, now Apple is going to introduce something better and take over the economy from, take over that sector from Microsoft. In this case, Microsoft will shrink from 5 leading in 5 sectors to 4 sectors, and Apple will expand from 3 to 4. And this will be the source of reallocation of resources within the economy. Now, if Apple keeps expanding successfully, in this case, Microsoft will shrink, and eventually, if Microsoft cannot respond, eventually, the sad thing will happen, and it will be forced to exit. So, we are not taking any, we are not making any judgmental statements here, but this is just the model economy. Alternatively, of course, not only incumbents are competing among themselves, and there are also new entrants trying to enter the market every period. Of course, in the paper, everything is written in equations, but so every period there are new entrants trying to enter into the economy, and the ones that are successful are going to take over the leadership in some of the sectors. As a result, they can also join the pool of incumbents. So this is the structure of the model, and how does innovation take place formally? Now, I own a number of product lines, and in any product line, I can do 2 types of innovations. First, the profit in each of those sector J is going to be linear in the quality QJ, and through successful innovations, I can improve the quality in that particular sector by a step size S. So this S is going to be the size of the innovation, and this innovation size will depend on the type of R&D that we do. For instance, internal R&D or external R&D is going to have different step sizes, and we are going to, again, estimate those from the model. Now, let's talk about the external innovation and also the heterogeneity of those innovations. So, when I do an external innovation, when I try to enter into Microsoft sector, I can do 2 things. Either I can do a follow-on innovation on an existing product that Microsoft is already producing, and I can do some relatively incremental follow-on innovation, or I can really revolutionize that sector and introduce something radical. So that's why we are going to distinguish between follow-on innovation and major innovation. The follow-on innovations contribution will depend, the step size will depend on eta alpha to the power k. So what do we capture here? When there's a new technology, you can improve this technology a number of times. There's a new typewriter, let's say. You can play around with the location of the keyboards, or you can try to make it faster and faster, but you're going to run into diminishing returns. You cannot improve that technology infinitely many times. Unless you introduce something really radical, like introducing a computer, you cannot just generate growth by improving the same product over and over again. So you're running into diminishing returns, just like writing academic papers. There's a flourishing literature on networks, on impact of networks on productivity. If you're the 2nd guy or 3rd guy who's writing the paper in that field, your paper will be impactful. But if you're the 100th guy writing on networks, people will say this has been done many, many times before, and they are not going to pay attention. So that's the idea to capture. So K is the number of times it's been developed or it's been improved, and through this, since alpha is between 0 and 1, it captures the diminishing returns aspect. When you do major innovation, by construction, this technology has never been exploited before, and that's why K is equal to 0. That's why the step size is going to be equal to simply eta, okay? So just to illustrate what will happen, if you do a major innovation, initially the step size is going to be this bar. If you're the second person improving on that technology, it's going to have a big step size, but relatively smaller compared to the previous one. The third one, again, smaller. And this will generate some cycles, and this is, for instance, the evolution of technologies. There are these waves, and once in a while, there's a major innovation that comes in and then revolutionizes the sector, and then you're, again, running into this diminishing returns, and this keeps generating the growth. And just to show you how we are labeling this, the first innovation is the major breakthrough, and all the green lines are the follow-on innovations in that particular sector. Now, firms that own their product lines can also do some internal innovations, and when they're successful, we will simply assume that they are going to improve that quality by lambda, and as I said, we are going to estimate this from the data. Now, what's the evolution within a given sector? What's the evolution of qualities? Well, here, the way we are thinking about this economy is the following. There is this technology cluster that started with patent number 1. P1 means patent 1, which was obtained by firm 1. When firm 1 introduced this initial technology, the improvement was eta. Then firm 2 obtained patent 2, which had the impact of eta times alpha. And then the third one, firm 3, patent 3, had eta times alpha to the alpha squared, etc. Then firm 3 managed to do 2 consecutive internal improvements in that particular product line. And then firm 4 introduced, again, another follow-on innovation with patent 6. And then, interestingly here, firm 5 introduces something really revolutionary into that sector. And then this initial technology cluster died off. Its time is over, basically. Now, how are we thinking about citations in this simple model? Well, there's a very natural link. Since these are technologically related patents within a given cluster, patent 2 is building on patent 1, 3 is building on 2 and 1, 4 is building 3, 2, 1, etc. Through this logic, you can simply create a cited and citing column just like in the NBR patent data. So as a result here, you see that cited patent 1 will be cited by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But since this patent number 7 revolutionized the sector, the previous technology cluster is dead. Once patent 7 is introduced, the previous patents will not receive any citations anymore. So this is going to generate a natural life cycle for patents to receive citations, for instance. What do we gain from this? Well, what we gain from this is that now we have a very natural expression for the citation distribution that we can generate from this model. Indeed, we can solve analytically, even though it doesn't look very beautiful on this slide, we can solve for the citation distribution analytically, and then we can go and estimate. The important thing here is that the citation distribution in the model is mainly governed by these step sizes. The estimation of the step size is particularly important because that information is going to tell me what type of innovations are generating spillovers. And now I can map the model to the data by estimating the citation distribution, and that will inform me about which type of innovations are generating bigger spillovers. Now, part 2. What we do is we take the firm level data, which is the US Census data, arguably, the best firm level data, and we are also utilizing patent level data, and we are looking at some simple relationships. In particular, we are regressing firm growth, employment growth on firm size. If you change the definition of firm size, again, you get the same relationship. What we see here is that there's a very strong, statistically very significant negative relationship between firm growth and firm size, and this is robust for alternative specifications. The second one is the innovation intensity. By innovation intensity, I mean the number of patents relative to firm size, and here I define it as the number of patents relative to the employment of the firm. When you look at the innovation intensity, again, it's negatively related to firm size here. When I look at the third relationship, this time I look at the quality, and what we do is the following. We look at a firm's patent portfolio, and we ask what fraction of those patents that the firm owns come from this superstar portion of the citation distribution, meaning that what fraction of the patents that I produce are coming from this really upper tail of the citation distribution. And that's the fraction of radical innovations that the firm has. On the right-hand side, again, we have the firm size. And what you see here is very interesting. Compared relative to their size, the fraction of major innovations are relatively bigger among small firms. So these are the three simple facts that we document from the data, and in part 3, we take this theoretical model to the data and we do a structural estimation. And we proceed in 3 steps. Some of the parameters we take it from the literature. The second one is we match the citation distribution. And in the third step, we do indirect inference, trying to match and some of the important moments. In particular, those regression coefficients are very important coefficients to match. And of course, in order to proceed, I need to specify an R&D technology. So there are 2 important structural set of parameters in this model that are going to govern the ultimate message. The first one is the step size, the parameters that are defining the step size distribution, which is this eta, alpha. Those are the critical parameters that are going to tell me the innovation, inform me about the innovation heterogeneity. The second one the second message is whether small firms or large firms are more innovative, and that will be governed by this production function. X on the left-hand side is the number of patents that I produce. And on the right-hand side, I have a generic production function. R is the R&D dollars that I spend. N is the firm-specific knowledge capital that I accumulated over the past innovations that I came up with. N is the number of product lines that I operate, which means that in N sectors, I currently hold the frontier knowledge. So that's why, to produce new ideas, I'm going to combine my existing knowledge stock with the R&D spending that I incurred this period. Now, these 2 parameters are extremely important because those parameters are going to tell me whether small firms or large firms, or whether there's size independence in terms of creating more ideas relative to their size. So what is the implication of this production function? First, if psi and sigma sum to 1, it means that this is a Cobb-Douglas production function. All these innovation flow rates will be independent of the scale of the firm, which means for policy, the estimation of this summation is extremely important. Because if from the estimation this comes up as a constant returns to scale production function, then it means that if we take all the firms today and chop them into smaller sizes, nothing will matter from a welfare point of view. Whether you're small or large doesn't matter because everything will be scaling up if this production function is a Cobb-Douglas production function. But if the estimation is less than 1, it means that you're running into diminishing returns as firm size increases, maybe due to span of control, maybe due to bureaucracy, whatever, something might be kicking in. In that case, small firms will have a relatively more advantage in producing new ideas, and therefore the optimal policy will be tilted towards small firms. Or if it comes out to be greater than 1, in that case it means that as the firm size increases, there might be some synergy in producing new ideas, and therefore the policy will be tilted more towards large firms. So therefore, as I promised, in 1 step we are estimating the citation distribution. As you can see, the model generated citation distribution, the blue one, is extremely close to the red one, which is the data, the empirical citation distribution. It's even hard to distinguish between the 2. So there's a very close fit between the 2. And from this citation distribution, we are estimating, again, the parameters that are governing the innovation step sizes. The second one is matching the moment in the data. So what are the moments we have to target? First, since this is an innovation model, we need to match the incentives right, so that's why we are targeting the profitability, R&D intensity that we observe in the data, the fraction of internal versus external citations that we observe. Internal and external citation in the data means self-citation. If you do self-citation, we count it as internal innovation. If you go and cite others and you don't cite yourself, in that case it's called external innovation. So you're building on some new fields that you were not working before. And then fraction of internal patents that you produce, entry rate into the economy, because entry and exit is important in this firm dynamics model clearly, average growth of the economy, and more crucially, the regression coefficient that we estimated when we regress growth on firm size. And as you can see, with all accounts, the model is generally performing quite well in hitting those moments. And then the question is, what about the estimated coefficient of this production function? And what you see here is that the sum is less than 1, very significantly less than 1, but it's not dramatically small. So it's relatively close to 1. And the message coming out from here is that we don't have this scaling up with firm size, meaning that small firms, on average, are more innovative relative to their size compared to large firms. We don't see a very dramatic difference, but it is statistically significant, and quantitatively it might add up. So depending on what kind of exercise one wants to do, this summation will be important. So the second one is, of course, robustness. For robustness, we are adding the second fact, which is the link between innovation intensity and size. Once you introduce this, again, the model is doing a very good job in hitting the moments. And again, we are getting an estimate which is around 0.9, which is, again, very close to the benchmark case, and that's why we are not in the constant return scale case, but the small firms being more innovative on average. And then in step 3, now what we are doing is we are adding also the third fact, which is the innovation intensity, so this was the fraction of major innovations, this was the innovation intensity. Once you add this one as well, again, the estimate is very, very close to 0.9, so it looks like the model is really asking for 0.9 estimate for the two summations. The first message that comes out from this estimation is that external innovation does not scale up one-to-one with firm size, meaning that small firms are more innovative relative to their size on average. This was the firm size heterogeneity margin that we wanted to achieve. What about the innovation quality or innovation heterogeneity margin? So for this, since we have the estimated model, now we can decompose the contribution of different types of innovation to the overall growth. And what you see here is a growth decomposition. First, new entry contributes 25% of the overall growth that we observe, which is in line with the Haltewanger and his co-authors' estimate, empirical estimate. So this is also good news for the model, even though we didn't target this directly. Second, internal innovations account for 20% of the productivity growth, and most of the growth is coming from external innovations, which is this creative distraction, the Schumpeterian aspect of the model. When you expand into new areas, then you're generating more growth in equilibrium. So that's why external innovations are contributing much more to growth. But why does it happen this way? Well, because when we compare the estimate that are associated to external innovation step sizes and internal innovation step sizes, what we find is that on average the step size for external innovation is 0.07, and for internal innovation is 0.05. Which means the second message coming from this quantitative exercise is that external innovations have on average 40% larger spillovers than internal innovations. Now, combine fact 1 with fact 2. Small firms on average are better in doing external innovations. External innovations are generating more spillovers. Once you sum the two, of course, the message that comes out from this exercise is that on average, small firms generate more spillovers per patent, which if there's any policy intervention, for instance, the message that will come out from this exercise is that we should tilt our resources more towards small firms, not because they are credit constraints or whatever, of course those will add up on top of this exercise, but because of the type of innovations that they do. So what is the implication, just to summarize? So the implication is that initially firms don't have much product line, so as a result, instead of building on their existing portfolio, they go and explore new ideas. And since exploring new ideas on average have bigger spillovers, as a result, small firms generate bigger spillovers. Once the firm grows, now the firm has a lot of product lines to focus on, and in relative terms, it allocates its resources on their existing product lines, and it stops doing, some exploratory R&D. It starts doing more like tinkering innovations on their existing product lines. And this has, of course, very significant implication on firms' life cycle. Through the lens of this model, what we learn is that a firm early in the life cycle should do something radical, but once it grows, it should start doing more tinkering innovations rather than radical innovations. In the NBR working paper version of the paper, we came up with 23 predictions, theoretical predictions from the model, and we went to the microdata and we tried to test each of them. And that's the advantage also, of course, having a theoretical model. You can read the data through the lens of the theory. And of course, as I said, this will have important implications for innovation and tax policy. I think I'm out of time, so thank you.
Thanks, Ufuk. Some questions. you in the...
I really like it. It's a lovely paper. So two questions. One was maybe a cheap shot, but I think it's probably pretty important. The results so you estimate this across all different types of goods and technologies, and I guess firm size, if you just think about capital needs or something, there's going to be a lot of heterogeneity in this relationship across different industries and technologies.
Sure,
right?
sure.
So I guess you have tons of data, so you can easily allow.
Absolutely. So one thing that we did is that especially since one of the key moments that informs this estimation is the reduced form regressions, we try to absorb all these sectoral heterogeneity by introducing sectoral fixed effects to absorb those type of sector-specific heterogeneities basically. So that's what we did. But of course, another exercise would be to estimate the model for high tech versus low tech. Arguably, they might have different capital needs. That would be another useful robustness check, actually.
So I had a second question, which was, you mentioned the word welfare, but I was a little bit worried about whether you really meant that, because I guess there's a lot of issues here around firms having monopoly rents, and you meant to, I think maybe you're thinking...
I deliberately said welfare, but I didn't say this would be necessarily welfare maximizing, because in this model, there are many inefficiencies, and I didn't do any welfare analysis here. I just said that this is a very good platform to do welfare analysis, but in this model, there are monopoly distortions to begin with. Second, there are intertemporal spillovers, right? And then there's also the creative destruction aspect, meaning that when I introduce a new product, the representative consumer or the economy benefits from this forever, but the firm benefits from this improvement only until it gets replaced by creative destruction. So there's also the mismatch of deadline of a social planner and firm. So there might very well be excessive investment in R&D, or there might be underinvestment in R&D. But that's not what I wanted to mention here. Conditional on the aggregate, we do less than the welfare maximizing or more than welfare maximizing R&D. If we are going to do some subsidy intervention, things have to be, through the lens of this model, things have to be tilted more towards small firms. But of course, in equilibrium, there might be too much R&D. In that case, we should not subsidize anybody.
So one thing that John Holtzwanger always emphasizes in the data is that there's a difference between the height of the firm and the length of the firm. In other words, small firms tend to be young, but not all small firms are young. In other words, it might well be the case, as you see in reality, there's lots of small, very unproductive firms, family-owned firms who persist for a long time.
Right.
And I wasn't clear in your model how age fits into this. And it seems to be a lot of things you were saying about the benefits of small firms. I kind of think are more related to kind of young firms rather than small firms. So do you want to just elucidate on that a bit?
Absolutely. So first, in this model, there's an extremely strong link between firm size and firm age. Why? Because when a firm enters, it enters as a single product firm. Once it's successful, it will expand to 2, 3, 4, 5. So a large firm in this economy is like a firm that has 100 product lines, but that will not happen overnight. So it has to spend some time in the economy until it grows. So that's why in this environment, there's a very strong link between firm size and firm age. Now, so if whatever I said in terms of the firm size, if you don't control for size, the same relationship will hold for firm age. Whatever is true for small firms, it's true for young firms in this environment. But once you control for firm size, age will not have a very strong bite. So that's why we need some additional ingredients, like introducing explicitly some entrepreneurial typed way we did in our paper with Daron and Nick, for instance, having different types, or in the other paper on firm dynamics in India paper with Michael Peters and Harun Al. There we explicitly introduced this entrepreneurial talent. Here we abstracted from it and we just wanted to get the basic facts on firm size.
But say the basic reduced form facts, that if you conditioned on age, would you still find those relationships?
We do, absolutely. We definitely see the relationship, still the negative relationship between firm moments and firm size. Some of it is absorbed by age for sure, but still the negative relationship is there. We tried that. Yeah. The link, would it be linear? there could be potentially some non-linear effect in the sense that of course, whether the firms are going into innovation sector at all on the extensive, here we have our analysis on the intensive margin, but on the extensive margin things might be slightly different. Our analysis is about innovating firms, so that's why we restricted our attention to all the firms that have at least one patent in the data. Again, we have lots of small firms because it's sufficient for for a firm to be in the sample to obtain at least one patent, but the extensive margin requires further analysis. There could be some non-linearity there.
Okay, I think we're having depreciation of the audience, so even the speakers, one of them is left. So I think we should call this session to an end. So thanks to everybody for coming and thanks for